there, listeners, it's Jess, your favorite geo-nerd from Prospector here. We'll take a deep dive into the world of weather and mining in just a minute. But first, are you in the mining industry and interested in joining Emily for an episode of On the Rocks? Curious about getting your message in front of our diverse listenership? Check out prospectorportal.com/sponsor to connect with our team and learn more about sponsorship opportunities. Now, let's get back to Emily and her glass of bourbon. Today, she's chatting with Jennifer Hibbert, a senior solutions engineer at DTN. Jennifer brings her meteorology expertise to the mining industry, providing specialized weather risk management tools for mining operations. They'll be discussing how climate change is impacting the industry, the challenges of communicating weather risks, and how technology is evolving to keep mining operations safe and efficient. So settle in for a fascinating conversation about the crucial role of weather in shaping the future of mining. Take it away, Emily.
Jenny, thanks so much for joining us here on the rocks today. How are you doing and how is the weather where you are?
I'm doing great. We've got beautiful sunny skies with fall just starting to set in. So leaves are changing. We've got foliage, and I get to wear a sweater. It's glorious.
Sweater weather.
Sweater weather.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'm excited to chat with you today because we try not to have these episodes be too news focused, but there has been a huge amount of weather in the news recently. So great timing to have this conversation. And also, as our listeners know, I live in Florida, and people who live in Florida can just talk about the weather for hours at a time because it it's
Always.
just as always, yeah, because we're monitoring the radar when normal people just monitor the weather report. To kick it off, could you share with us a little bit of how you ended up here at the nexus point between weather and the mining industry?
Yeah. So my background is in meteorology. I went
Mhm.
to school in Asheville, North Carolina, which is relevant in the weather context
Yeah.
today. Um, and I went there for meteorology. We had a great program, and I had a great professor who pulled me aside and said, "I think you'd be really good at this." And then the rest
Mm.
was history. And so I, majored in meteorology, and then well, my intention was I was gonna save the world from global warming. Pretty
Mhm.
much majored in climate studies and global warming and, but also did weather forecasting, dual track there. And then I graduated in 2009 when the economy was not doing very well. But the
Mhm.
one industry that was still hiring was oil and gas. So I moved down to Houston and started working in, forecasting for oil and gas. I worked offshore on some oil rigs around the Gulf of Mexico, and then, an opportunity came up in Singapore. So I moved to Singapore, spent 10 years there working in offshore oil and gas, going offshore Malaysia, um, Russia, Thailand, all across the South China Sea. And after 10 years in Singapore, which was a great place to live, I decided to move to Australia. And that's where I got into the weather in the mining industry because mining is
Mhm.
such a huge industry in Australia. It's a real a backbone of the economy there. There's a lot of money and jobs and just economy that goes around the mining industry in Australia. So I got into that there. Then I moved back to the US to kind of expand our business into the Americas market and personally be a little bit closer to my family. So,
Sure.
yeah, so that's what's brought me here today.
What a great example, first of all, of how science related jobs or STEM focused jobs can also allow you to travel and work and live all over the world, right?
Yeah.
And pull you into all sorts of places that maybe you didn't originally plan on going into.
Yeah,
Certainly been the
absolutely.
case for me.
And
Yeah.
the first time I worked offshore, that was a real eye opener of,
Mm.
not realizing that maybe that I would have loved that so much. So maybe in
Mhm.
another life, I was a full-time, radio operator or something, just working
Yeah.
on vessels, ships, or rigs. But i- that gets complicated as we move through
Yeah.
our lives. I have a kid now, and that's just not
Hmm.
really a sustainable lifestyle when you've got a small kid at home. So,
Yep. No, absolutely. Well, in both, offshore oil and gas and mining, a lot of folks may not really think of weather as something that's critically important, or climate more broadly, perhaps. So, how does it impact kind of daily operations at a mine or in the exploration space? How do those two things kind of come together?
yeah, well, you've got people that are working outside, which always they
Hmm.
will be subject to weather. Not just temperature, but, the temperature does relate to what you wear, the PPE that you need. Heat stress can be a big issue if you're working in hot
Mm.
climates. But really, lightning is our one of our most acute risks when you've got people working
Mm.
outside. And so that's relevant to mining, it's relevant to offshore, it's relevant to golf courses, to concerts, to events. I mean, anywhere you've got people outside, there's that risk of lightning, and lightning is like an intense, life-threatening risk. So
Yeah.
that's one of our biggest, yeah, threats to operations and to people in general. But when it comes
Hmm.
terms to operations and mining, water management is always a big issue. When you've got rainfall, you need to manage that rainfall, how much water is coming in. Um, that's not in the mining context, but just in the human life context. That's what we're seeing over
Sure.
in the southeast of the U.S. with the latest hurricanes that came through. It was just a matter
Yeah.
of water. That was the only real. I mean, wind was an issue, but the water was the real risk
Yeah.
uh, parameter coming in, and it just flooded waterways. It was overcapacity of pumping systems, of how they deal with them. Catchments and culverts all got flooded,
Hmm.
way over capacity. So water, seems like it's this soft, flowing, not such a big deal. But really, when there's too much water coming in, it doesn't stop for anything. It fills in every crack and crevice available, and it can be incredibly destructive. It can
Yeah.
destroy. I mean, mudslides are a big issue. It can interrupt roads. It can affect your mine slopes and your walls and your roads. Just so many different aspects when it comes to managing water. Tailings, dust,
Hmm.
that in not enough water or too much water. It's really a Goldilocks situation where we need just
Yeah.
the right amount of water. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and these extreme weather events that, would love to hear your thoughts. It seems like, certainly things that didn't used to impact certain parts of the US at least, and certainly globally, I think is true also as dramatically as they are now. I mean, it's such an important thing for mining operations to be monitoring, right? Because I mean, certainly living in Florida, we're very used to hurricanes and monitoring for them, preparing for them, and kind of the potential impact that they bring. Even when you talk about like the insurance that we hold in personal homes and businesses and stuff, right? But parts of the country like Western North Carolina, certainly that would not be on the top of their radar, right? So, like,
yes. Yep.
what
I,
what do you kind of see going on with that?
well, changing conditions are happening all over the world, whether it's
Hmm.
more frequent extreme events, or uh, you know, general temperature rise or drop, or more extreme
Hmm.
heat events and more extreme cold events. Uh, we're seeing that happening everywhere. In the offshore space, we're seeing a lot more what used to be called, 100-year events
Hmm.
happening much more frequently than every 100 years. So these
Yeah.
statistical analyses of how extreme events work, and that's relevant to insurance as well, they
Hmm.
are, yes, not as true as they maybe once were. When we look
Hmm.
at data sets of 30 or 50 years of weather data, we're finding that's not actually as indicative of what you can
Mm.
expect as a shorter data set. Maybe 10 years, maybe even 5 years is actually a bit more accurate because it's capturing
Mm.
some more of these extreme events. So we're seeing, in offshore wave conditions that are just higher than what they
Mhm.
used to be. In mining, we're seeing, yeah, more heat events than we used to have, wind events that are more anomalous than they used to
Mm.
be, rain events. Of course, we've got bigger storms, that are bringing more water um, to locations that historically didn't have that. It's definitely happening all over. So I'm living in the Northeast in Vermont right
Hmm.
now, and over next door in New Hampshire, there's the Lakes region, and that's where my dad grew up. And hearing my
Yeah,
dad,
that's where my parents are
is
too.
that,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, and hearing people talk about how the lakes used to freeze over, and there would be the ice fishing competitions, and they would ice skate on the
Hmm.
ponds, and how they have memories of going out on the frozen lakes at Christmas. And
Yeah.
now there's no way those lakes are frozen by Christmas. You're lucky if they freeze at all. Many years
Hmm.
the ice fishing competitions are being canceled. Here locally, there's a pond where people like to go ice skating outside, but it's not really freezing in the same way, and it's not safe to ice skate on. So now everybody's
Yeah.
ice skating inside, but it's just very, people are living this. There's not really this
Hmm.
debate of whether it's happening or not. I mean, it is. We're seeing this happening. Now it's a matter of how do we prepare for it? How are we getting our
Hmm.
information, and how are we acting appropriately based on that information? Um,
Yeah, and that kind of has two parts, right? There's like the immediate response to when weather is happening. So how do you keep your people safe? How do you protect your operations? But there's also the planning perspective,
yes.
right? Of like understanding what your project's going to need and your people are going to need. And I think oftentimes of folks that are doing exploration in the far north, or building projects in the far north where they're reliant on, ice roads, right?
Yes.
And the ability to move stuff in during the winter,
Hmm.
as well. And if you don't have that amount of time, then your project development window
Absolutely.
really narrows,
Yep, that
right?
window narrows. You can't get your trucks in or out. We are
Hmm.
seeing that there's a trend of the thawing of the permafrost happening.
Hmm.
It's freezing later, it's thawing earlier. That's interrupting those ice roads. Then on the flip side, there's also opportunities there because we're seeing less sea
Hmm.
ice. And if they have, a marine port terminal nearby that they can access, that
Mm.
season of being able to get those ships in and out is starting to increase. Now, there's also drawbacks to that as well, because that means that the Arctic life is being interrupted. Seals and polar bears and various other species are having a harder time surviving because they don't have the same ice infrastructure that they used to have.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean, open waterways mean we can get ships in and out, so there's just some shifting business opportunities and approaches and methods that are worth being considered now on the longer term, because mining is one of the most long-term planning industries that
Yeah.
I've had experience with. People are actually looking 30 to 50 years ahead.
Hmm.
And Singapore used to do that, but many other places, countries, industries, businesses are not that long-sighted. um,
Yeah.
when you have mine reclamation plans that you have to replace, restore the vegetation to what it's like now before you break ground, then you need to plan for, when you're writing these permit applications, like planning for what the climate you expect is going to be. Because if you're saying you're going to restore it exactly how it is now, but the
Mm.
climate is shifting over the next 10 years and it no longer really supports that same type of vegetation, then you could be in a sticky spot where actually this thing we committed to is now impossible. So,
Sure.
how do we work around that?
And where does that data come from? Like, I assume that's part of what y'all do, to a certain extent, right? But like, how should companies at different stages like be getting data in order to plan or prepare for that?
It is tough. We do have some climate modeling. Um,
Hmm.
my experience is more in the operational forecasting space. So we do a
Mm.
lot more of alerting for what's happening right now, um, and what is a risk and threat to your ongoing operations, to your daily HSE plans, and to your production schedules, and how you can maximize safety, environment, blast plans, all of the day-to-day work that goes on at a mine. But for longer term outlooks, we do climate studies. And so that's going to be looking at various climate models, and trying to determine what we think is the most realistic outcome. It's a bit
Hmm.
tricky because we don't have with weather forecasting. You've got weather stations that can validate, and they're just two very different sciences, I suppose.
Mm.
And so when you're looking at the climate, you're looking using longer term climate outlooks and
Yeah.
hoping that we've got an accurate one. Now, what we did see is some of these climate models that we were looking at 20 years ago are proving, and that we thought, oh, this is so extreme. This is an absurd solution. This is never going to happen. And we're seeing, actually the change has been more aggressive than what some of those models
Mm.
were showing. So,
And how do you see that kind of manifest in the operational day-to-day weather? Like, what do you all help provide at the site level in order to kind of mitigate some of those risks? I know you mentioned lightning as an example.
yeah, lightning is a big deal. And then the frequency of storms. Um,
Mm.
and the strength of some of these events. There seems to be much more energy in the atmosphere to dissipate, and that energy gets
Mm.
dissipated through thunderstorms, through the band of thunderstorms around the equator called the ITCZ. That is one of the major components of the way that the climate redistributes this energy. We also have hurricanes and typhoons, and the jet stream. So that's gonna bring cold air south, and it brings warm air north in the northern hemisphere. It's the opposite for the southern hemisphere, but it redistributes that cold air from the poles down to the tropics, and it brings that warm air from the tropics up to the poles. Um, with kind of the additional energy that we're seeing in this system from warmer sea surface temperatures, that's serving to fuel a lot more thunderstorms
Mm.
and a lot more tropical cyclones. And so that's having big impacts on site. Northern Australia has lots of storm activity there. Mines in North America tend to be a little bit less affected by tropical cyclones, but we do have monsoon seasons. And
Mhm.
in places where, especially, you don't get a lot of rainfall, and then the monsoon comes in, and there's these acute times where you do get a lot of rainfall, that can really inundate things and almost seem unexpected. Um,
Mm.
and so we try to give people the information, the tools, the insight, and the time to react appropriately. If we can tell you a few days in advance that you're looking at an unprecedented event, then you have time to prepare and mitigate for that. And that's what we hope. As meteorologists, that's our whole prime uh, purpose in life. It's the
Yeah.
National Weather Service. It is to protect lives and property. So, in this recent event with the Hurricane Helen affecting Western North
Yeah.
Carolina, we go back and we see the warnings that were issued by the National Weather Service, and they were dire. It was
Mm.
text and emails saying this is a historic event, this is unprecedented, this is a huge risk of loss of life, um, and so it really hurts my heart that there was still so many people affected and harmed by
Yeah.
this. One of our biggest challenges is how do we communicate this information in a way that gets people to take action, to take the right action, to trust the warnings, to not
Hmm.
overwarn, because data fatigue, warning fatigue, that's a real issue too. When you've got
Yeah.
everybody telling you that this is an emergency and there's not an emergency, then you stop trusting when people say there's an emergency.
Yeah, I mean, I know some of the coverage that I've seen is from Helene in particular was that folks in the Carolinas like knew that there was a bad storm coming, but the issue was they thought they would be safer by staying in their homes as opposed to trying to, whether they should evacuate. Again, like here in Florida, like evacuations are not a normal occurrence, but like we
It's
have systems where people are
Yep.
familiar with your evacuation zone and when should you go versus when should you stay and like how far do you need to evacuate in order to stay away from certain types of threats, right?
Mhm.
And in parts of the country where evacuation is just not a normal thing, where to stay safe, it's like, okay, stay at your home, stay off the roads, right? Don't be
Right.
out in the bad weather. And how do we maybe better communicate again the so what, right? There's a big storm, so what should you do?
Yeah.
Right. And that's so hard because it can be so location dependent and
Yeah.
right. And
And that's, maybe why I really appreciate working in the mining industry rather than
hmm
working for, a national weather service or a general public forecasting operation. Mines have tarps. We have
yeah,
written plans of how we're going to
sure.
react and respond to this weather.
hmm
And that makes me feel much more comfortable with how they're taking care of their people, how they're taking care of their communities. There are plans that are written down, there are contingencies, there are, often there's plans written for very rare events, but
mm
because they would have such a big impact to the mine or to their staff that we actually have a written plan for this. Um,
Yeah.
so that's yeah, one maybe my favorite thing about forecasting for the mining industry is that yes, the safety infrastructure is so much more advanced than what we see for general life. I mean, Western North Carolina is complicated because you've got a lot of isolated mountain communities, and
hmm
it's not. I mean, you're told you need to evacuate, but where do you go?
Where do you go?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And how do you do it
yeah,
when the road conditions are already treacherous and lots of small creeks and water bodies that maybe make it challenging.
yes,
Yeah, it's awful. And I know even here in Florida, the impact from the storm, storm surge was devastating
hmm
in parts of Florida as well. And and again, having been in Florida now for a while, I also the fatigue aspect, like hashtag Florida man, like is a real manifestation. Like people don't you don't go anywhere for anything, lower than a cat 3, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's just kind of I'm
yeah,
generalizing, right? And not necessarily saying that's the right thing, but like we here in Florida, like we throw hurricane parties, right?
yeah,
Like it's a, so it is. There's a huge behavioral aspect of dealing with weather and what people perceive as just normal events that may be considered extremely abnormal in other areas.
yeah.
And so again, having those plans written down for the mining industry is so important because of course then it's not, the behavior isn't just up to the individual person, right? It's the company saying,
Yeah.
here's how we're going to react.
So I have an interesting story of I was at Mine Expo last week,
hmm
and at the airport on my way home, I took a red eye out Thursday night. So all throughout the conference, we had people stopping by to see the track of this storm and
Mm,
people that were planning to fly out on Friday and transit through Atlanta. And we were telling
mm,
people that might be
yeah.
difficult.
You may want to reroute.
You may
Yeah.
want to go through Chicago or somewhere else that's not through, anywhere in the southeast. Um, and so I was out Thursday night, and so I'm at the airport chatting with the guy next to me, as we're eating our dinner, and he was, several years ago, he was at a hotel in Acapulco in Mexico that got hit by a Category 5 hurricane and
Mm,
was absolutely destroyed. And
mhm.
he showed me these pictures, these photographs of this, and I mean, like a five-star resort. He was there for a mine event as well. And the whole place was destroyed. There's shattered glass
Yeah.
everywhere, walls ripped out, ceilings ripped off, all of the trees down. I mean, it was just devastating. And he made a comment that I found a bit amusing where he was telling me about his background. He was a bit older than me, and he moved to the States from Russia back in the 80s. Uh,
Mhm.
and so my impression was he'd maybe been through some things. And
Yeah.
he made a comment about, you phone people, you don't know what to do. And you have people who are looking at their phone all the time. And I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
am
okay.
I a phone people? I may be a phone
Am I
people."
a phone?
But, just that, we don't have that individual, kind of training or response
Mm,
built into us, and we're a little bit relying on our phones, which, to be fair, we are sending alert text messages to all of the
sure.
phones, but yeah, no, just a really amazing weather story of the destruction of weather and yeah, why you need proper preparation.
Well, and I just think, I mean, coming from a geology background and somebody, I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up in Maine. We were outside all the time, very rural area. Like you're very familiar with, again, extreme weather. And, that saying, like, there's no such thing as bad weather, there's only bad
Bad
gear, right?
clothing.
Like,
Yes.
yeah, just like you can prepare for just about any kind of, not, certainly not, storm surge type stuff, but in general, you can be really well prepared. And I just think part of it is, a healthy respect for Mother Nature. And
Yep.
then when it comes down to it, weather and nature get the final vote.
Yep. They sure do.
And you've got to be, I'm probably a phone people also, and I love Mike's weather on
Yeah.
Instagram. If anybody out there follows follows Mike on Instagram like I do, but just being aware of what's going on around you and being connected
Mhm.
with natural conditions, especially if you work in mining or oil and gas or anything that involves being outdoors, right? I mean, you have to be paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's no bad weather, only bad gear is the
Yeah.
right way to put it, and we can build mitigation and, you know, stock extra water if it's hot or have an extra layer of PPE if it's cold. Um, but then, of course, there's some things where you just can't escape and you need to get out. You need to be under
Yeah.
shelter. Lightning is one. It's it's dangerous to be outside in the middle of an open field, an open pit. You're exposed, but
Yeah.
also going into your vehicle isn't necessarily that safe either because that also can attract lightning. With these giant mine tires, they can blow out
Mhm.
if they get struck by lightning, and sometimes it's not an immediate effect. You
Oh.
can get lightning that can strike a mine vehicle, and it can be a lag of up to several hours, and then that tire can blow out on you. Um,
Oh, wow.
so there's definitely some safety concerns there, and we want to make sure that people have their plan in place and what they can do to avoid any mishaps.
And where does technology come into that? Like, has it been evolving as rapidly as I would assume that it has in terms of monitoring and
Yes.
adaptation for operations?
Yes, absolutely. It's really incredible when you see weather technology and where it is now, and how well our models are forecasting where hurricanes are going, how strong they're
Mm,
going to be. I mean, the skill in forecasting every year is improving so much. I mean, we're seeing now that we have hurricanes where 7 days in advance we have accurately predicted the track and the rough strength of where that hurricane's
mhm,
going to go. Um, yeah, we're finding that it used to be, in weather forecasting, that the challenge was you were trying to pull some pieces of observation data from wherever you could. A weather station
mhm,
here, maybe a ship observation there, maybe a community report here, and you're trying to piece together the story of what's happening with the atmosphere. Nowadays, we're facing a very different situation where we have so much data. Not
mm,
necessarily everywhere in the world, but a lot of places we have dense weather stations, we have satellite data, we have radar, we have synthetic radar, we have aircraft that's reporting back. We have very sophisticated models that are forecasting. They have more layers than ever before. They've got a dense time resolution, so it's terabytes and terabytes of data that for one model that are being generated with each run. And we've got
mhm,
several of these models. So it's no longer trying to find a story out of nothing. It's trying to distill a story out of a deluge of data. And
mm,
how do we do that? How do we not get data fatigue from looking at
yeah,
data that's not really relevant or that doesn't help us make a decision? How do we filter that to get the story that's going to mean something to us and give us
mhm,
something to action? So we're finding with AI, that's been a
mhm,
huge machine learning and AI are really taking the world by storm. There are
right,
so many industries are going to really see a big shift in how we operate, in how we code, in how we process big data because of AI and machine learning. And we're finding that now we can, you know, bring in so much more data and use these AI tools to help validate that against the observations that we're picking up and really determine the best forecast from that. So it's far more sophisticated than it used to be, where it was about, an agency making the best model based on their physics or their understanding of how the atmosphere works. Now we've got all this
Mm,
data where it's, we take all of these different models from modeling centers and then we're picking which one is performing the best. And that's dynamic, so that's changing with
mhm.
each time step to really improve our forecast skill, every day.
And that's kind of how you end up with like the spaghetti models,
Yeah.
right? Like for hurricane tracks, right? I mean, I know it's more sophisticated than probably again
Well,
what I
spaghetti
watch on,
models are just that's
but
just every run of the cyclone
yeah.
models. There are specific cyclone models that spin up when a storm develops. So you've got
Mm,
them, the national modeling centers, and then you have hurricane specific storms that will run.
mm,
And spaghetti plots are they just plot them all on a map, and you get to
yeah.
see. Then you can do a bit of consensus modeling of where are most of these solutions going, what are most of these
Mm,
solutions saying. So we tend to weight that a bit heavier, but then you've got outliers, and the outliers are worth
mhm,
considering too, because sometimes they're seeing a driving factor or a parameter that's weighted a bit heavier that is actually going to be the one that influences the trek and the strength of the storm. And that, that's worth considering too. So there is,
so how do you model something like lightning then? Like how does that
you cannot model
like
lightning.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lightning is, it's also why it's such a concern for operations because we can't
Mm,
forecast it, we can't model it. We can give an idea of where there's a higher chance of thunderstorm development in any given area.
mhm,
Um, there's atmospheric conditions for favorable or unfavorable for thunderstorm development. Some places you can see climate like oscillations, or you'll see bigger larger scale features where we're seeing a wave here where there's a lot of lightning developing and that's kind of moving across the tropics. You can track that a bit and say, okay, well, in this
mm,
circle we're looking at a increased thunderstorm and lightning activity. But in general, as far as each strike, they are completely
mm.
unpredictable and unforecastable. So that's where we have to
Oh,
rely
interesting.
on real-time monitoring.
Mhm,
So for real-time monitoring, we have a network of lightning sensors all across the globe. Usually each strike is triangulated with about 5 different sensors, and they'll pick up
okay.
on that electromagnetic disturbance in the atmosphere, and it'll be able to locate where that strike is.
Mm,
And so then we have maps that plot all those lightning strikes so you can see where the lightning is and when that's coming towards you. So a lot of what we do is real-time alerting for lightning.
mm,
So, again, it's how do you communicate that in a way that's effective and gets people to take the action where
yeah.
mines have good infrastructure. They usually have very specified range rings. So alert
Mm,
status orange has actionable instructions associated with that.
okay.
Alert status red means everybody get inside or whatever the
Mm,
specific things are for that mine. And so we can deliver that through we have weather website tools, we have SMS, we have email, we have mobile apps, we have integrated with lighting systems or radio systems or phone systems
mm.
so that all sorts of different devices can go off at a mine. Again, we don't want to like cause alert
Freak everybody
fatigue,
out. Yeah.
where it's,
Yeah.
well, all these lights are always flashing. We just ignore it.
Right.
But, so when that's in your red zone and there is a confirmed lightning strike within, 8 kilometers or 6 kilometers
Mm.
of your site, then you can trust that there is an event happening and it is a threat to us. And we have to follow our plan for the next, 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever the mine's specific protocol is.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that's so cool if you could. So, explain to folks what the lighting option is that you all have. I think that's so neat.
So we have a partner that they install like smart light bulbs. I don't know if you have any of those in your house. Um,
Hmm.
I'm living with family and in this new house that they've just built, and it's got all this like wild technology. It's got geothermal heat in the slab, and
Mm,
they've got these smart lights, and so they're triggered to at 9 o'clock they all dim.
mm,
We can change the color of them or the color temperature. It's very cool. So this company
Yeah.
installs those types of lights, but into mines.
Hmm.
And so that way, if it's alert status red, they can flash the lights red and then they go back to
Yeah.
normal. And so, yeah, just all the ways that you can't ignore the warning. We also do sirens and beacons.
Yeah.
So that's,
I was gonna say that's what we have here at all the parks and
yeah,
everything. I mean, you can hear them from like all the 3 parks in our neighborhood. They go off
yeah,
when the lightning's close enough.
that's
Yeah.
great. I love hearing that. I want
Mhm.
everybody to have systems in place that protect them from lightning. Um, a lot of a lot of times we hear of sites using a specific a site sensor. So they've got
Hmm.
one instrument on their site, and that's going to tell them when there's a lightning strike nearby. We find that these single site sensors don't do that good of a job of
Mm.
accurately measuring the distance. There's some variables in play, but they can be 10 to 50 kilometers off sometimes.
Oh, wow.
And so when we use a network solution, which is already in place and exists all over the world, we are usually within 5 kilometers of accuracy for
Mm.
that lightning strike. And with that, we can make sure because we serve a lot of schools, we serve a lot of concert
Mm.
venues, we serve a lot of sports, fields and uh, golf courses. Well, golf is an especially dangerous lightning
I
activity
bet.
because you're sitting there with a giant metal pole in the middle of a
Right.
field and you're swinging it up above your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more people get struck by lightning like playing golf than well,
Really?
I don't actually have the statistic behind that.
Oh,
So it's a common
but it would
story
make
we
sense.
tell, but maybe, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing I should probably fact check this, make sure it's not an old wives' tale.
Make sure it's not like it's no longer like pickleball or
Yeah.
something. Lord knows in Florida, it's probably
It's
pickleball players
pickleball,
because
yeah,
just they
pickleball took the
vastly
world by
outnumber them.
storm, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That would make a great news headline. Yeah. The dangerous weather-related incident is playing pickleball in Florida. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, so when you have these network solutions then, is it, like a collaborative I mean, it must be a bunch of different network partners that have sensors that are fully integrated somehow?
There's a few, not that many. There's,
Mm.
maybe 3 or 4 major lightning networks
Okay.
across the world, and oftentimes companies will work together, or you
Mm.
get, you know, companies that contract with them, or yeah, there's only a few, but there are a couple multiple of them so that we can
Okay.
corroborate and validate and, yeah, but it's a big task to install
Mhm.
hardware around the world. So, um, it's not that easy to enter that market, and you don't have
Mhm.
it's a huge investment, so you don't have, like, 20 different competitors out there, that are monitoring local lightning conditions.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me how many sensors might be out there globally, though. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
such a
several
crazy yeah,
thousand of them.
like you said, like data overload
Yeah,
in a way, right,
yeah.
without the ability to analyze it.
And then you have to
Yeah.
also process it properly because
Mhm.
it's not just lightning that creates an electromagnetic return in the atmosphere.
Mm.
Static can do it. So another thing about single site sensors in dry and dusty environments that we found is that, when it's dry and dusty, you tend to get more static electricity. And that can
Mhm.
trigger your lightning sensor to say there's lightning nearby.
Oh, like a false alarm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I guess if we ask all of our guests the same question at the end of the podcast, and I'm super interested to hear this from you. You know, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the mining industry overnight, like you're not having to really convince anybody or deal with any pushback, just wave a magic wand and change one thing. What would you change about the mining industry?
Everybody would have a reputable, sophisticated forecasting and lightning monitoring solution in place at their site that every
Mm.
person that works there can access and look up so that they can look up what's happening at their home too.
Mm.
Because, yes, it's important we keep them safe at work, but also we want to keep them safe at home. And when people are checking a weather service to see what's happening at home, they're also happening to see what's happening at work. So
Mm,
there is no blind spot. Everybody is looking at the same information. There's no conflicting, oh, my weather app says this, well, but my
yeah,
phone says this. Um, we don't want that. We want one single source of, truth. And whether that's
mhm,
through, a product that my company supplies or if that somebody else supplies, like I just want everybody to have a solution in
yeah,
place.
yeah.
Yes.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us. I think it's going to be really interesting for everybody listening in, and again, encourage everybody to learn a little bit more about how these two things intersect.
Yeah, thank you for having me. If you can tell, I'm very passionate about the weather and how the weather affects society, culture, humanity, us at work, us at home. I mean, the weather touches every aspect of our lives, and it's the best small talk. So feel free to reach out
That's
to me if
right.
anyone wants to have a chat about the weather.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Jenny. Look forward to having you back sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of On the Rocks. Love the show? Well, there are thousands of listeners just like you who love On the Rocks and are interested in the state of the mining industry, its future, and the market. Want to join Emily to share your perspective on the industry or sponsor an episode to get your company in front of our listeners? Simply go to prospectorportal.com/sponsor to connect with our team. And don't forget to stay tuned for more upcoming episodes. See you next time.